further ado, Bella.
Thank you very much indeed, Larry, and delighted to be here. Great to see so many people here, given the constraints outside. Let me, just to start with an apology, as the British like to do, is to say that sorry I have to leave early. I would have loved to stay for the full hour and a half, but I do need to rush away. But I won't, in my remarks, go into the detail of the crunchy analysis, because I know colleagues on the panel are going to do that and do it very well, much better than I could. But I thought it might be worth just saying it might be interesting for you just to hear a little bit about where how the DFID's thinking is evolving, and it is very much in an evolutionary phase at the moment. Let me firstly say a big thanks to ODI, UNICEF and SCF for keeping the focus on this issue. I think it's a particularly critical time with the MDG summit, obviously in a couple of weeks' time, and then decisions to be made about the focus of our efforts in the international development community between 2010 and 2015. It's tempting, obviously, to start thinking quite quickly about post-2015 MDGs, end in terms of their current targets and what happens next. But I think we're trying very much to balance that with pull back to focus on what needs to happen to accelerate progress over the next 5 years. But it's great to see that this issue of equity has been given such focus, and I'm sure the outputs of your work will be very useful to us indeed in DFID. Under the new set of ministers that we have in DFID, policy is obviously evolving. It's undergoing a refresh as new ministers inevitably do. So I can't really make a set of statements to you about where policy on equity in the MDGs is at this point in time, but we'll start to see statements coming out post-MDG summit, which will give some indication of where our thinking is going. But I can give you sort of a rundown of some of the key policy areas that are evolving in DFID, which may be familiar to those of you who are staying in touch with ministerial speeches and other communications coming from DFID at the moment. But also some hooks which I'd hope that you, as interested players in international development, might think about sort of engaging with us and helping DFID do a better job than we would do otherwise on these areas. Firstly, results and transparency is a really big agenda for DFID. We're opening up information along the lines of what's happening across government. Much more information is going to be available, possibly even down to the last £500 of expenditure. It's the direction it's going across government, but I think more importantly, the focus on results in terms of what we're delivering on the ground. And I think this is a really welcome shift. And I know that it's the ambition of our ministers for DFID to lead the way on this and start to set a new standard in international development for actually being much more focused on the results that we're delivering rather than just the money we're spending. And lots of opportunities there around that, particularly around things like much more focus on participant verification, beneficiary verification of initiatives, of programs which are designed for their benefit, for their welfare. These kinds of approaches are going to become much more embedded in what we do going forwards. Secondly, there's an agenda around empowerment and putting people much more central in the development process. And I think there's an acknowledgement, and you'll see it in Andrew Mitchell's speeches, that we've focused on the processes for reducing poverty rather than the poor themselves, and we need to bring the poor back centre stage. And this is a big area of policy rethink for DFID. So we're looking now, things like instruments like cash transfers, social protection, but we're looking more at the sort of cash transfers in an empowering way, a hand up, if you like, for the poorest, are becoming quite an area of focus for us. Where it's not new for us, but that's coming more sharply into focus. We're also looking in our governance work at balancing the focus on institutional development with accountability more. And that's again, accountability is not something that's new to us, but perhaps it hasn't had the same level of focus as we might like going forwards. So two areas there where I think big opportunities for bringing an equity focus into our work. Thirdly, girls and women, and I think this is a policy area that our ministers have seized. It's and really want to have quite an ambitious agenda for us in DFID, and that's great. What we'll see, I think, is much more of a focus on the outcomes for girls and women, and in terms of our strategy, what are the strategies that we're employing that are specifically going to empower girls and women who we know are very much left behind in the development process. And many would argue that if we want to accelerate progress on the MDGs with a focus on equity, then girls and women is where we need to start. Fourthly, focus on fragile states. We know that around a third of the world's poor, Andy Sumner may question this, but live in conflict-affected and fragile states, and where we know in not a single fragile state has a single MDG been reached. This is the WDR analysis, which is going to be emerging over the next couple of months. So we've got a real issue of inequity between countries there, and the fact that so many of these countries are in an intractable process of fragility and sometimes conflict. We have a new approach of peace building and state building, which is being rolled out now through our bilateral, in our context of our bilateral aid review, which is focusing much more on what have we learned over the last 10, 15, 20 years even, on how we can do development better in situations of fragility. There are some successes out there, but there are a lot of countries where we could have done an awful lot better. That's going to be a big area for us going forwards. And then lastly, and this isn't a comprehensive list, this is just 5 areas, but there will be others too, is around reproductive maternal child health and malaria, which are 2 policy areas that are moving, probably some of the quickest policy areas that are moving under the new government, and where we're going to be preparing business plans, strategies, and there'll be consultative processes around that, and where I know already that the focus on equity is very strong. So there's a taster of some of the policy areas that are evolving, all of which have touched on the issue of equity and are absolutely critical for MDG achievement. I'd be happy if there's time to answer any questions. But
just one quick one. Which of those 5 is the most important? Are they all equal prominence, do you think?
They're quite different in
character. I know
character.
they're quite different.
That's
why I wondered whether there was one more than any other that the new government is really heavily pushing.
I would say no. I couldn't say. I wouldn't say one rather than the other. They all unfold in different ways through the institution, and they all have a slightly different way of focus. But I couldn't pick.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily want to rank them.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay,